I'd like to welcome all the people who've joined us for the latest Behaviour Analysts Practitioners Network. Today we've got Dr. Mata Yebra from ANU, who's going to talk to us about the flammability work and fuel moisture work that she's been doing. That project has made great progress, and we're at the point of incorporating that into our operations in many jurisdictions now. So it's really good for Mata to actually talk to us about what the system is, what it can do, and what she sees as the next steps, so we can make that utilisation step happen effectively. I'll hand it over to Mata. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for the introduction. Let me share my screen while I make sure you all hear me well. All right. There we go. So as Mike said, today I'm going to present an overview of the current and the near future capabilities of the Australian Flammability Monitoring System. And most importantly, I'm going to be mainly focused on my vision of the system's future. What are the limitations we need to overcome to effectively move it into operations? So I thanks very much the opportunity to present this webinar today to all of you. And of course, I acknowledge the contributions of many researchers and end users to this project. So before I'm going into detail into the system, I'm going to spend the next 3 or 4 minutes setting the context and highlighting why do we need this kind of information. So it's not new for this audience that more frequent and intense bushfires are dominating our summers. Last fire season, we had fires burning the country in an unprecedented way. Only for eucalypt forest, the area burned, it was massive, and it was almost 20% of the Australian eucalypt forests were burned. And that proportion was observed to be much higher than the annual average for the past 18 years, and the largest since at least 1951, that is where we had writing records. So it's evident that things have changed, and as the Royal Commission have recognized, the extreme dryness of the forested regions over large continuous areas was one of the determining factors in the size of the fires. So last season, we showed fires consuming vegetation that normally doesn't burn because it's too wet, and there were absence of soft containment lines such wet riparian vegetation in gullies, or vegetation in wetter topographic positions that again normally slow down the fires. We use fuel moisture content estimates from the Australian Flammability Monitoring System that I will present with more detail in some minutes to produce these figures that corroborated the unprecedented dryness of the landscape. So on your left, you can see that nationally, fuel was the driest since at least 2001. That is when we have the satellite MODIS imagery we used to compute these maps. And when focusing on the southeast forest, this figure on your right tells us a similar story. So the black line presents the average and standard deviation of the fuel moisture content for the southeast forest from 2001 to 2018. And in the blue, the low moisture values that the same forest reached during 2019 and 2020. Of course, that slide I just presented don't fully provide evidence of the effect of live fuel moisture content on fire behavior and risk. Looking at the literature, we can find a bit of everything, arguments for and against, but we have found observational evidence on an effect of fire spread rate And again, last summer, we showed significant fire activity in fuel arrangement dominating by live components. So moisture content of grassland and shrublands have also been found to be good predictors of number of fires and total burn area and the occurrence of large fires in some forests, in some areas in the Mediterranean region of Spain. Also, predictions of probability of house loss indicated that for houses surrounded by a given percentage of trees and shrubs within 40 meters that are indicated in the x-axis here, the mean probability of house loss indicated in the y-axis here is less when vegetation surrounded the house, higher values of NDVI that is used here as an indicator of vegetation moisture content. So it's evident that monitoring fuel moisture content is important. So there are different methods to do that operationally, and most of you do this collection before a prescribed burn, for example. We take field samples on the ground. So you collect a sample, you wet it fresh and dry, and then the difference is the moisture content. This is the most accurate way to do it, but it's unlikely to be generalized to a large scale because, again, the measurements are very localized in a specific location. Meteorological index can also be used and have been used in the past, but the problem is that the weather stations are sparse, and therefore you need a spatial interpolation. And the most important limitation is that these are only indirect estimations of the moisture content values, because for a same weather condition, plants can have different moisture content depending on the strategies they have to cope with drought and the physiologic of the plant, the depth of the roots and things like that. So given the limitations of field and meteorological approaches, various methods have been developed to estimate this variable from remote sensing data. And the principle behind that is simple. Given that plants with different moisture content have very different reflectance, or in other words, depending on the leaf tissue water content, the reflectance is reduced to a varying extent. And based on these variations, we can create algorithms that convert the reflectance measured by the sensor on a satellite into fuel moisture content values in near real time. And this is exactly what I've been doing since I finished, well, I started my PhD in 2004. And over the last 3 and 4 years, and supported by the Bushfire Natural Hazard CRC, we have been working on the deployment of the Australian Flammability Monitoring System. That is the first website in Australia that uses satellite data to collect information on live fuel moisture content, and then displays this information on an interactive map available to anyone. So the algorithms behind the production of the data displayed in the website are published. And given I wanted to cover a lot today, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in that, but I will encourage you to look at the manuscript if you want that detail. And if you don't have access to the manuscript, just write me an email. I will be very happy to share the manuscript with you. But briefly, the algorithm is based in what we call radiative transfer models. So it's a physical-based algorithm. So we use these models to simulate what we call lookup tables. So these lookup tables are scenarios of reflectance for different values of fuel moisture content and for different land cover types. So basically, when we have an observation from a satellite for a specific location of Australia, we compare that observation from the satellite with all the simulations from our models. And we find which simulation is more similar to the observation, and the corresponding fuel moisture content value is the solution for that inversion project process, and therefore is the estimate of the fuel moisture content for that specific pixel or location in Australia. So we have evaluated the algorithm across several locations in Australia, and the algorithm explained 58% of the variance in measured fuel moisture content with raw mean square errors of 40%. And the slope and the offset of the linear regression between measured and retrieved fuel moisture content suggests that there is no significant bias in the estimate. Consider individual land cover classes. The inversion model reproduced the patterns of low and high grass fuel moisture content well with an R-square of 0.6, but not so good for shrublands and forests, with the R-squares are lower. However, in absolute terms, the algorithm produced best estimates for shrublands, followed by forests and grasslands. So these values reported in this table are within the range found in the literature with a remote sensing approach, and are more accurate in retrieving fuel moisture content for grassland than other two empirical models developed for Australia by Kakamo and Nolan, which is expected because these were empirical models that were indeed not calibrated for grassland ecosystems. But for example, the Kakamo model better reproduced the seasonal variation in shrubland fuel moisture content, again, because this model was an empirical model that was calibrated for especially those areas that were used for the validation. So one of the limitations of any optical based satellite product that I wanted to bring here is the obscuration in the signal by the tree canopies and clouds. And also the second one is the inability to distinguish between different strata of the forest. Or in other words, so in a very dense forest, the system will only provide information on the fuel moisture content of the canopy. And as the forest open, it will be a more integrated value of whatever is in there. But of course, we know that knowing the conditions of the understory fuels is very critical for fire behavior analysts. So we have some ideas to overcome these limitations, but no active research at the moment, and I'm not going to present that today. So fitting, then once we have fuel moisture content values, we also convert that into what we call a flammability index, and we do this by fitting a continuous logistic probability model between fire occurrence that we obtain from a satellite burn area product as dependent variable and fuel moisture content as independent variable. So we calibrated 3 separate logistic regressions models for flammability for grasslands, shrublands, and forests using different fuel moisture content proxies derived from the satellite product. And the models have a good accuracy in terms of the rock, looking at the rock curves with AUV of 0.7, 0.78, and 0.71 for the different land cover types. So this table summarizes the information in the system apart from the live fuel moisture content and the flammability index that I have currently presented. We also provide an estimate on the uncertainty of the estimates. And we do this as a measurement of a standard deviation of the 40 best fuel moisture content estimates. When we run the algorithm, and I say we compare the observations with the simulations in the table. So instead of looking for the best result, we look for the 40 best. And we use that standard deviation in the potential solution as a measure of uncertainty in the estimates. We also host data of soil moisture content produced by another bushfire natural hazard CRC project led by BOM using the Jasmine modeling. And this provides measurements at 2 different depths that are there in the table. So this slide presents the workflow behind the Australian Flammability Monitoring System. And I just show it here for you to understand that current 4 days time lag that there is between the satellite acquisition and the data being displayed in the website. So basically, when the satellite measure the reflectivity, these values are stored in the national computing infrastructure, and we run our algorithms for the different tiles of the satellite imagery, and we pack those in annual cubes. And then we merge those in a mosaic for Australia that is, and that data is accessible via the threads service of the NCI in NetCDF format. Then we have a web mapping service and leaflet programming language to display the information in the website and provide some functionalities for the user to interrogate the data. So I made this quick video yesterday as a demonstration of the website. So basically, well, you have a disclaimer at the beginning. You need to understand that this is a research prototype. And then the user can select any layer, live field moisture content, flammability, or the two soil moisture content layers to visualize. The user can select any date since 2001, that is when the MODIS data record starts, and visualize that map. And then there are some contextual vectors that the user can select. Now we are looking at the far weather areas, but you can select the states and territories, national parks, local government areas, and others. Then you can hide the windows, so you only see the maps. You can zoom in and zoom out. You can make it full extent, and then you can search for any specific location, either using a name or a lat long. And the web server will take you there. May take a bit of time depending on the speed of your internet connection. And then once you click in any pixel, you have the values of the live field moisture content for that specific pixel. And we also have some ancillary information like the land cover type and also the tree cover of that pixel. And we include this information in relation to the comment that I did before that is based on optical data. So the higher the tree cover is, we can have some information on whether that moisture content estimate is mainly coming from the canopy instead of the ground. And then we have also the measurement of the uncertainty in the estimates in that pop-up. So we can make the layer transparent, so we see what's behind as reference. And we can also activate the satellite imagery. And we can, so the system visualize current incident feeds, but you can also remove that functionality. And then you can also activate the plot, the time series of values for that specific pixel. And in dark blue, you see the year that was selected in the search on the top in here. And in light colors, you have the highest and the lowest since 2001 for reference, and in gray, the median of the time series. Okay. So unfortunately, by the time I made this video yesterday, one of our functionalities that end users request and we included was not activated because Lawrence McCoy let me know that there was a bug in the system, so I deactivated. But we also have a functionality to provide average values of moisture conditions for the vector of reference you may have selected before. In this case, is the weather areas. And we also have a functionality to provide area relative values. So how the values for a specific date compare with the long-term time series. So are the values very much above average or very much below or in between? So how the system is currently or intended to be used. So it can be informing different phases of our management. So in terms of planning, it can assist with scheduling and planning prescribed burns. For example, drier fuel moisture content in a forest may indicate more potentially to scope the the canopy. We said that, yeah, in a close fire forest, the values are mainly coming from the canopy. So you can identify fuel moisture content differentials in the landscape that can act as a soft containment lines, or it can give you information about the long-term fuel conditions that can inform the prescribed burning decision support tool. Or in some cases, and this is used in the European Forest Fire Information System, is used as an input in the emission assessment and smoke dispersion models. In terms of preparedness, the current fire danger rating system doesn't incorporate directly information about fuel moisture content. I know it is in the plan of the new fire danger rating system to incorporate this information, but in the meantime, and until that happens, these maps can use to amend the preparedness levels or raise a flag in relation of the fire danger rating in response to lower or higher than average landscape dryness conditions. Exceeding fuel moisture content, determine fuel moisture content. So, for example, for a given day, we have the same fire weather conditions, but one area seems to be drier than in average. Perhaps you want to increase the preparedness levels. In terms of response, it can assist in firefighting and resource allocations. Fuel moisture content is a direct input in spiny-fed grass, so it could potentially be used directly there. And then we can also use it as to identify potential anomalies in predicting rate of spread for lower fuel moisture content values, given that current fire behavior models don't include live fuel moisture content as an input. And similarly than in planning, we can use it to identify soft control lines based on fuel moisture content differentials. So we have recently revived further funding from the Bushfire and Natural Hazards CRC within the portfolio of projects that aim to understand what additional data can be provided to emergency agencies to help them predict and respond to bushfires in the future. And this project objective is to assess optimal approaches to integrating the information about fuel moisture content and soil moisture content that we provide in the Australian Flammability Monitoring System to investigate more in detail whether the moisture condition of the landscape can be an indicator of elevated fire risk. And we are going to evaluate this in significant black summer fires that have been chosen by the end users. So in terms of planning for continuity, we know that Terra and Aqua satellites have already exceeded the expected lifetime, and at some point, not too far in the future, will become inoperative. Therefore, we also did some feasibility analysis of potential alternatives to models to support the system continuity and redundancy strategy. So we selected all these different sensors for testing the suitability. And when picking up these sensors, we also included different sensors with different temporal and spatial resolutions that could potentially bring either more spatial or more temporal resolution than what we currently have with the MODIS system. So these are the results of the test. Basically, we showed that pretty much all sensors were very similar in terms of performance to retrieve fuel moisture content. But the BIRS sensor obtained slightly higher accuracy, followed by the Sentinel-2, Landsat 8, and Imawari 8. So BIRS is therefore the best candidate to ensure the continuity of the system, but Sentinel-2 and Imawari 8 are the best second and third candidate, but will bring benefits in terms of increasing the spatial resolution. Sentinel-2 is 20 meters in the shortwave infrared bands we use for the algorithm, and the Himawari-8 will bring more temporal resolution. This satellite collects imagery every 10 minutes. So that's why we first focus on those two. So this is an example that compares the capability of the current system with MODIS and with Sentinel-2. And we are working with Geoscience Australia, who has indicated a desire to act as the operational agency for the long-term running of the system and produce the operational data production in the longer term. With Sentinel-2 data hosted in the Digital Earth Australia platform. So as you can see, when we move to higher spatial resolution data, we can see a lot more detail, obviously. And this map of Sentinel-2 that we compute in Namadgi National Park shows you those gradients that we know exist with different topographic features. So we see wetter and drier areas depending on the aspect of the topography, for example. So these trials have proven that it's feasible to retrieve fuel moisture content with higher spatial imagery, higher spatial resolution imagery. But the challenge is that this increased highly the computational and storage requirements needed. And this has proven to be an obstacle when it comes to operationalize the system at a continental scale. So we have also received some funding from the Bushfire and Natural Hazard CRC with a double objective: one, to facilitate the sustainability of the system in the longer term, transitioning the system to Geoscience Australia, Digital Earth Australia, instead of having the system host in the national computer infrastructure as it currently is. And when doing that, we are also trying to make a more computational efficient algorithms to retrieve fuel moisture content. This algorithm that I explained that compares every observation to every simulation is highly computationally expensive, and we are using some alternative algorithms using artificial intelligence to make the computations faster. Yes. So next, we have also made some tests on applying the algorithm to Himawari-8 data to retrieve sub-daily variations in fuel moisture content. And this is a test we did for a specific area for a given day. And we retrieved some signal of having lower fuel moisture content values of a grassland area towards the middle of the day, and we see there a bit of recovering. But we haven't validated this with field work, and that's something we are planning to do, and we will do with a grant we have currently, we have received from the ARC linkage program together with the University of Western Sydney, with the ACT Rural Fire Service and the New South Wales Rural Fire Service and the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment as a key end users. So if you still are wondering about the potential continuity of the fuel moisture content data provision, I just briefly wanted to mention that at the ANU Institute for Space, we are developing a Ozfuel mission that aims to better fit for purpose in terms of the resolution and signal sensitivity to characterize Australian fuels in a way that the foreign-owned satellites cannot do, because we're not specifically designed for these objectives. So all these optical remote sensing based products I have presented with different satellites lack predictive capability that is also desired for fire management. So we are also working with BOM, and we have an exciting development that we aim to bring to the Australian Flammability Monitoring System soon. that is the capability to predict live fuel moisture content, which is indeed a very difficult task, since fuel moisture content is modulated by complex physiological, phenological, and ecological processes and characteristics of the plants. So again, with colleagues from BOM, we perform a lag correlation analysis over 60 selected locations where Jasmine model had good skills. And the objective was to understand the relationship between soil moisture content and fuel moisture content. And we showed that at all sites, soil moisture was found to be a leading indicator of live fuel moisture content. And the strength of the relations between fuel moisture content and soil moisture content varied from vegetation type and also with soil profile depth. So generally, we found a moderate strong relationship of around 0.5 and the 0 to 35 centimeters soil moisture profile seemed to be a better predictor of live fuel moisture content. And the lag time between soil moisture and fuel moisture content response varied with land cover time, and it's so to change from days to months. So based on these results, BOM developed a simple model to predict daily live fuel moisture content, where it is hypothesized that daily variations in live fuel moisture content from its annual cycle can be predicted using daily deviations from the annual cycle in the 0 to 35 centimeters soil moisture content profile. So the annual cycles of live fuel moisture and soil moisture content were modeled using Fourier cosine series. So this slide here shows the correlation and the normalized rod mean square error difference, obtained from comparing the model and the original fuel moisture content product for the validation time period, which is 2010 to 2019. And the model was done assuming a time lag of 14 days. So we see that the model predictions are found to have a good skill when applied nationally, and this is applied at 5 kilometers pixel resolution. The correlations are high, normally greater than 0.7 in most of Australia, and the errors are normally less than 20% in most of the locations. So this is especially visible over seasonal grasslands and cropping areas and in northern savannas. So the results of this study highlight that a modeling strategy can be used to address this gap in the forecast capability. And we can predict fuel moisture content 40 days in advance of the operational application. We are also doing some work in improving the characterization of dead fuel moisture content. It's obvious that dead fuel moisture content is a key fire behavior driver, and therefore we need to move towards better modeling as well. And we currently don't provide spatial information on that variable in the Australian Flammability Monitoring System, so we recognize that it would be good to include it. So this research has been done via Lisau's PhD project that has investigated the influence of soil moisture on surface and subsurface liter fuel moisture content at different Australian sites. And her work has concluded that two versions of the model, so the existing models that don't consider the contribution of the soil to the liter, and the model couple, where these contributions are accounted for, perform very similar when the soil moisture content is relatively low, while the couple model show better performance than the uncoupled model when the soil moisture is relatively high. This is to be expected. So when the soil is wet, the contribution of that wetness to the liter is greater than when the soil is dry. So on her ongoing research to improve dead fuel moisture content estimates by coupling soil moisture and on the physics-based COVA model proposed by Stuart Matthews. She has done a experimental field, a field experiment in the Australian National Botanical Gardens to better understand the influence of soil and fuel moisture content. And the results, preliminary results indicate that the influence can be in two ways. One is through the vapor flux, and the other is through the capillarity flow from soil. And this depends again on soil conditions. So we also have a new project that will start soon, building on these findings from LISA research, where the first step will be to apply this theory to another area in Victoria to test the findings, and then she will replace the meteorological point data by gridded meteorological data. So this will and soil moisture content estimates from Jasmine. So this will provide capability to have spatial maps of fuel moisture content, dead fuel moisture content at 5 kilometers pixel resolution. So with this, I would like just to finish with a take-home message. Well, effective adaptation to extreme fire events and the increasingly challenging fire management situation requires accurate and timely data on fuel flammability. So the Australian Flammability Monitoring System is providing this information for live fuel moisture content and soil moisture content and related flammability, but is still not used at full potential in fire management. So for example, it's not directly ingested in the current operational system, and we are just giving some ideas on how it could be used until that happens. And just we have some research and development ongoing on fuel moisture content to be forecasted and also to be able to be converted into secondary variables that are more easily to be integrated into fire management decision. We are also working on providing spatial maps of the fuel moisture content. And but we still need more research again to incorporate fuel moisture content into the new generation of fire behavior and fire risk modeling. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them now. We have plenty of time for that, I think.
Thanks, Marta. We've got one question in the chat box already. Is the lookup table updated constantly as you get more ground truth data, or is the plan to have it static?
That's a good question. So the lookup table is static, but we are now with the ARC linkage project I mentioned we are planning to take more measurements to improve it, especially to collect more data in eucalypt forest, because we didn't have a lot of data to calibrate that table in eucalypt forest. Most of the data we use comes from measurements I did in Spain during my PhD, so it's mainly European species. So it's very promising that even though the data used for the calibration comes from Europe, the performance is still fair. But again, we want to improve those lookup tables with Australian conditions.
Thanks, Marta. Does anyone have a question? To either put your hand up or type in the chat box. Question from Jackson Parker is, where are you getting your canopy cover data from?
So the system doesn't use canopy cover per se. So the algorithm doesn't use that information to run the estimates. But well, we have some products that we have developed here in my research group that provides that information from satellite data if you are interested in having that information. But the algorithm itself only uses information about land cover maps that comes from a MODIS product, and the reflectance from MODIS data.
Thanks, Marta. I had a question in relation to your proposed project or project that's just started around the linking surface moisture to soil. Do you anticipate that there are climatic variations in that relationship, or do you see it potentially being static across the continent?
That's a good question, and the answer is that there might be variation depending on the little fuel, because the characteristics of the leaves can be different, and therefore the flux that comes into the leaf might be different depending on the fuel, that fuel type. But what we have seen is that the key differences are between the dryness of the soil. So when the dry is wetter or drier, the influences are different. So far we haven't seen a big difference between fuel types, and the 5 sites in Victoria where we have tested the modeling have a diversity of fuel conditions. Yeah.
Thanks. That's obviously a question that you still need to answer. Agnes Dorney, are you able to speak?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Hey, Marta, this is Angus from Kablamo. Thanks for the presentation. It was great. Really excited to see this. My question is around the Australian Flammability monitoring system. I mean, I'm assuming it's not there today, but are you planning on building an API where the data itself could be accessed, via a JSON feed, or another alternative for this service? And I guess the second part of the question is it data that you are planning on making available for the public to use?
So all the data is currently available through this web server we host in the National Computer Infrastructure, but we are working with Geoscience Australia to build a longer-term API and for them to maintain the system in the longer term, given they are an operational agency. That's it, no? What was the second question?
Whether the data will be made available in JSON format or something similar for the public to use.
Yeah, definitely. Indeed, the data is already available for anybody who wants to access, either through the website or through the Threads server, but it's in NetCDF format.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Mike, you are mute if you are talking.
So, thank you. Alex Bland had basically the same question, just saying, will the data be available through a WMS or WFS format? But I think you've just answered that question. And Jackson, thanks you for the satellite analysis. He said it's useful to actually see the different satellites compared, and one that we tend to forget about is VERS. That's actually more useful than MODIS. So thanks for that. With your work with GA, presumably you're looking at web services in that relationship, so that GA create the web services in a number of viable fashions. I think that's the question. I think so, but I think the answer is yes. I had a question with you've analysed grass, woodland, forest, and crop, and you've also looked at shrubland in the original work. Obviously, that space of shrubland, woodland, or things that have shrubby understories is one of the spaces where we're struggling for data, and where your work is showing quite great promise. Is there a consistent vegetation structure or classification that you're looking for to spread that across? Or, because I noticed you're not using the same groupings for all your work.
Well, ideally we will want to use the vegetation classification that you guys use, and we've been talking to the team developing the new fire danger rating system in order to use the same fuel classification they used. And this is especially true when it comes to the secondary variables we want to generate. For example, we are doing some analysis on looking at what are the threshold values of fuel moisture content that explain larger fire occurrence. And we want to calibrate that for different fuel types. So it would make sense to do this for the same fuel types that are used operationally. So all the products and the science behind the analysis are consistent. But yeah, it would be good to have potentially the vegetation breakdown in the same way that it is done for the new fire danger rating system.
Yep, thank you. That's something we, as a sector, obviously need to do to help you. Are there any other questions of Mata? There's another question in the data. Is the current data being used by any fire services? And if so, what can you tell us about how they're using the data and the impact it's having?
I think that's a question for the audience. So if anybody has a clear answer.
We can certainly do that. Is there anybody out there? I know ACT have been looking at it, and Victoria to some degree. Is there somebody out there who is happy to can say something about what they've observed or how they're using the data to date? Who's out there?
Just put somebody on the spot.
I saw somebody from Parks and Conservation on the list. No, it just says PCS FMU. So there's somebody listening, or Adam's not there, is he? Or Brian Levine, you're not there anymore, but you may be able to tell us what happened a few months ago.
Well, if nobody answers, I can give my perception, and I summarize the way it's used in one of the slides. So I think it's not fully integrated at the moment. The end users are just looking at the data and trying to understand how they could incorporate, but it can potentially inform the prescribed burning, whether the go or no go. Although again, the key driver is the dead fuel. The live fuel may influence how much the canopy is going to support. And during the last fire season, I was a few days in the headquarters of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service providing this information to see if the fire behavior analysts could incorporate it in their predictions. And again, there was not a direct way to incorporate it because these fire behavior models they use don't directly ingest this spatial data. But I think they found it useful to have this extra layer of information to see if there would be any anomaly in the fire behavior because the landscape was anomalously dry or drier than usual or things like that. So again, at the moment, it's more, I think, getting work and qualitative way to interpret how it can be used than quantitative or direct ingestion in the system.
Hello, Mata, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. G'day, Mike. It's Tony here. Tony and Adam McLaughlin sitting here. Adam's just on the phone at the moment, but I'll just to back up what you were saying before from a practical application, we look at our prescribed burn areas, and so looking at both the soil moisture and then the fine fuel flammability is pretty important for us. We had one burn just as an example in the Piccadilly area, and it's really sort of helped us understand a bit more about our sort of our soft or our dry creek containment lines effectively, and whether they're going to be able to hold on certain aspects. And that information, along with some of the LiDAR fuel mapping that Mata's group's done already, that we're using them now pretty actively in combination with our burn planning to have a look at our lighting patterns, to have a look where we can actually pull up some of those areas, but also to say to people, look, under these circumstances, we're unlikely to be able to hold this, and there will likely be an escape or overachievement, should I say, in a particular area due to the combination of fuels and the fuel moisture that we've had. So we're definitely actively using it, and it's very handy from that point of view. But we're also trying to link into other, we're talking about Jasmine before and a few other sort of soil moisture type monitoring type stations. So we're putting it all together and trying to use it, you know, in a practical way, I think, and that's where we're seeing some strong performance, I think, from those, and we're definitely interested in the Sentinel type imaging as well, but the resolution, that's a big improvement from the previous ones.
Thanks, Tony. Jackson Parker has commented that he's used it in shrublands as an additional intelligence information to support flammability analysis and decisions. Angus has a question about how significant is live fuel moisture content in CSIRO's Spark bushfire prediction model. I can answer that briefly in that Spark is using the existing fire behaviour models. So if the fire behaviour models use live fuel moisture content, then it will be required. But given that most of our models don't require live fuel moisture content, it's not going to change any of that yet. So at the moment, the only model that requires live fuel moisture content are the Spinifex and Buttongrass models, as I understand it. The others are still using surrogates of temperature and humidity, and are mostly focused on dead fuel moisture. So, which is what's sparked Mata's last project that she was talking about. Are there any other questions before we close off? I'll take that as no. Just have a quick check on the... No, that's okay. I want to thank Mata for presenting this work. It's really significant work in giving us another angle on part of the fuel complex that is hard to measure. And as some of the discussion is, both Mata's comments and some of the other comments have indicated, we focus very much on dead fuel moisture because it was easy to measure. We understood how it impacts on fire behaviour, but it's quite clear that the elevated fuel, that the live fuel does burn and does have an impact, particularly in heathy and shrubby fuel types. So it's an area where this won't be the last you'll hear of it. We now have some techniques for measuring it, which is really good. That means that we can, not only can we measure it and try and look at the implications in a qualitative sense, but research can now occur where we can actually look at events, use the methodologies developed to say what is the live fuel moisture content and analyse whether that's had an impact or not, or whether it's one of the factors. So I think this is really breaking work, and Mata's already taking it further in terms of looking at the dead fuel moisture and looking at a range of both techniques of how to sense it and collaborating with agencies about how do we use it, how do we incorporate it as another factor that we can look at in our fire danger and fire risk suite of indicators. So I thank her and her team, because it's not a solo position, on the work they've done, and look forward to the work they're going to do. Thanks very much for your attendance today. There is another session planned in December, and I believe some information about that has gone out. So I hope to see you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.